My wife's gym obsession led to her ignoring me, affecting our marriage. She finally admitted having an affair, part 2. To have a deeper understanding and to listen to part 2 of the narrative with the most genuine feelings, anyone can look for part 1 and listen to the story from the beginning. Additional information. She's ruined my life, but I just feel numb right now. I barely feel anything at the moment. It would have been bad enough for her to have an affair and cheat on me. But she couldn't have stopped when she found out she was pregnant. At least I could have walked away if it wasn't for this pregnancy. Maybe I still can, but I won't know for sure until I get some test results. She's almost positive the baby is mine. I'm stuck dealing with her forever then. My child will grow up with divorced parents. Their mom will be the gym bike. Maybe she'll even take off to live near her family and take my kid with her. Oh, but then she couldn't be near the guy who gives her butterflies and fucks her in gym changing rooms. The thrill, the excitement. How can I even blame her? She's ruined fatherhood for me, whether this baby is mine or not. If by some chance the baby isn't mine and I'm able to completely break free, how will I not think of this one day when I start a family? I was so happy to have this baby with her. I was really excited, even though we hadn't planned for it right now. We had names picked out. I've been there for everything, and now she does this to me. Not only to me, but also to this poor kid regardless of who their father is. She's saying, I'll never go back to the gym again. I'll never talk to him again. But she can't even say whether she's in love with him or not. What kind of idiot does she think I am? I feel like that doesn't really mesh with the fact that she doesn't even know if she's in love with him or not. She obviously still has very strong feelings for him, which are probably coming more from between her legs than her actual heart, but doesn't really matter either way to me. She still thinks there is hope to save our relationship. Jesus Christ. I think despite anything to do with him, she's dependent on me in a way. For stability maybe. Just out of comfort, maybe. We've been together since she was 20 years old, so I'm just this familiar person, I guess. She has her gym friends out here, but other than that she has no family or friends out here. She makes pretty good money, but I make more and all of our benefits are through me. Even with her good salary, it would be difficult to survive on her own as a single mom here with all of the daily living expenses, or at least live anywhere near the level she wants to live at. Yeah. I believe she still thinks there's a chance I'll agree to raise another man's child with her. She doesn't take me seriously when I say there's no way I'd do that. She is dependent on me. She probably wouldn't leave me if I knocked somebody else up and wanted her to play mommy. I know that sounds terrible and it's nothing I'd ever do, but I feel like she'd be mad and she'd go screw somebody else to get back at me, but she probably would be too scared to actually leave me. I don't feel the same way about leaving her. I'm sad to leave her. I don't want this to be our reality. I can't even say that I completely hate her yet. But I won't raise another man's child. If she feels so strongly about that guy and he's so wonderful, go get together with him then, and leave everyone else alone. It's hard to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one who betrayed me. We had built a life together, shared dreams, and made plans for the future. Now, all of that seems meaningless. I've tried to understand her perspective, but every attempt just makes me more angry and confused. How could she risk everything we had for some fleeting excitement? We're supposed to be focusing on the upcoming birth of our child, preparing for parenthood together. Instead, we're dealing with this nightmare. The stress is unbearable. Every day feels like a battle to keep my emotions in check, to not lash out in anger or fall apart in despair. I keep picturing the future I had envisioned, with us raising our child together, and it feels like a cruel joke now. Update 3. Next week I'm scheduled to meet with a lawyer to discuss the situation and get some advice. I feel a bit uneasy about some things and would like to understand them better. Take for instance the gym she frequents, where somehow I've never been invited. Yet surely enough, she introduces me to a couple of her fellow gym members, a somewhat older married pair. It feels like she's showing me off, but in a place where my presence was never welcomed before. Another matter that bothers me is the longevity of her affair. She has admitted that she's been with the other man since last summer, but that's based solely on her own admission. It leaves me wondering, has it been longer? In fact, I have met this other man. I remember their rendezvous clearly. It was last summer when he got drunk at a bar and couldn't drive himself home. He phoned her to come and rescue him. But it didn't feel right for her to go out late at that hour, so I joined her. As for our living arrangements, I'm conflicted. I want her to leave our home, but I also don't want her to return to her family yet, especially because of the baby. If she delivers the baby here, I'll be in a better position if the child turns out to be mine. However, if she goes home to her parents, she could very well be allowed to stay there, and that would be considered the baby's place of residence. Despite the turmoil, her life seems to go on. She missed work for a few days, but she has returned since then. I recall this morning she was quite upset. Still, I had to leave for work. She had to go in late, And when she eventually arrived, her co-workers were all caring for her, offering her food and tea. Clearly, they didn't know the real reason behind her distress. Update 4. My wife has agreed to a paternity test on February 29, 2024. The woman who was once my wife, who I considered a classy woman, has turned into complete trailer trash. The woman I once considered my wife, who I regarded as a classy lady, has completely transformed into someone I barely recognize. Today, she announced that she's moving in with her affair partner from the gym. She's pregnant, and the baby might be his or might be mine. She's too embarrassed to go get a paternity test. She spent about a week trying to get my attention, to get me to talk to her, to get me to beg her to stay. I didn't fall for any of it. I've largely been ignoring her, and when we do speak, I keep it very brief. We've been living together this whole time, but I'm in a different room now, functioning separately from her in every way. Her attempts to get me to pay attention to her and commend her for not going to the gym for 5 days in a row didn't work. Today she texted me to say she is moving in with him. Somehow, I still care about this person. I've already met with a lawyer though. I can care about her as a human being and potential mother of my child without being married to her. Still, it stung to hear her say she was going to be with him. I told her it wasn't a smart move to leave the house and suggested she meet with a lawyer. She doesn't care about anything I have to say. I don't think she needs to move in with anybody. I actually feel bad for her that she can't just be on her own. I asked if he actually knew she was pregnant and wanted to know what story she's been telling him this whole time. She said he knows and he doesn't care if it's my baby. He loves her and wants to be with her. Bizarre. You can't find anyone else? Someone who isn't a married pregnant woman? Why would you take that on? Doesn't make sense to me. He's scum, but good-looking scum who is apparently gainfully employed and owns his own home. So you can't tell me that my married pregnant wife is his only option. I just can't imagine being a single guy like that and wanting to deal with this baggage when there are other options. And if this really is my baby, then what? They'll live with my wife and this weasel 50% of the time? I don't know how my life turned into this mess. And she thinks it's embarrassing to get blood drawn for a paternity test? She moved in with her affair partner last weekend. She didn't take very much at all. Most of her stuff is still in our house. I still get the feeling she was just waiting for me to beg her to come home, but I didn't reach out to her at all after she left. It was a strange mixture of relief, anger, and sadness. I don't think I ate at all until last night. Just never felt hungry. Drank a little too much. But I'm fine. I'm posting this update because I've received a ton of messages from people, and honestly, it's emotionally draining to respond to each one and to have to type the same stuff out. I just don't feel like talking about her that much. This morning she texted me to say her affair partner wants to get a DNA test done, so she's going to do it. Look at that, it didn't matter when I wanted one, but now that he has requested it, she suddenly thinks it's a great idea. She asked if I wanted to submit a sample because it'll be cheaper to have 2 dads tested as part of one package. I don't even care about the cost at this point. I just want an answer. I don't have to see or interact with them at all. I just have to make my own appointment with the lab to get my cheek swabbed. So this Saturday, I'm going to do that, and we should have the results within a week. I'll take what I can get at this point, because it's better than her dragging this out for another 20 weeks. So that's it. I'm fine. I'm going to work every day, trying to function. Just feel stuck in limbo. I miss her. Honestly, I hate that she's there with him. It makes me sick. Part of me does want to beg her to come home. It'll be even worse if I find out that it's my baby and she's there with him. Unless he drops her at that news. I won't let myself beg her. I won't play any of those games with her. Update on my wife's affair and pregnancy on March 15, 2024. My wife has been having an affair with a guy she met at the gym for nearly a year. She's around 22 weeks pregnant right now. She was about 17 weeks when I discovered her infidelity. Despite her insistence that I was the father, she refused to get a paternity test to ease my mind. We recently had a paternity test done at her affair partner's request, and it proves the baby is mine. The news brought mixed emotions, making me feel up and down. Initially, I thought I wanted to be completely done with her and avoid any lifelong ties through a child we shared. However, when I got the results, I felt a sort of relief. I'd already embraced the idea of becoming a father for months before I found out about the affair. Sometimes I have moments where I can't believe this is my life and that my child will be born into such a situation. It makes me resent her deeply. She's still living with him. All of her belongings are still here in our house. I refuse to do the work of packing everything up for her. She doesn't seem concerned about taking any of her things, beyond the essentials. After we got the news that I'm the baby's father, she texted me to say she's glad I'm the father, and that she knows I'll be a great dad. She was texting me new baby name ideas last night. She's tried calling, but I ignore the calls. I only communicate with her via text. This morning she asked if she could come by and get a few things. I told her it was fine as my lawyer advised me not to prevent her from entering the home, but I told her he better not be with her. So who shows up with her? The scumbag boyfriend. He walked right into the house behind her like it was no big deal. She ran upstairs to get the stuff she wanted, and he and I were left standing there in the living room. He told me it wasn't her fault that he was there. She had told him I didn't want him to come, but he forced his way along. He wanted to talk to me, supposedly to tell me he understands how I must be feeling. No, you don't know. He said he knows I probably don't believe him, but he genuinely loves her and knew he probably wasn't the father. He accepts it and then tries to assure me he won't try to take my place with the baby and hopes we can just get along since we're both going to be in her life now. He promised that she's fine and he's looking after her. I told him that I couldn't for the life of me imagine why he wanted to be with a pregnant woman carrying another man's child, and that I found it bizarre. Then I told him if he didn't get out of my house, I'd punch him. I went upstairs and found her trying to find some things in the bathroom. I got mad, asked her why she brought him along, and told her I found it really strange that he still wants to be with her now that he knows he has nothing to do with this baby. I made it clear that I refuse to let him have anything to do with my child. She said he talked her into coming, and she's sorry, and never meant for any of this to happen, but she's in love with him now. He is supposedly what 30-year-old her is looking for, not me. She's setting up a nursery in his house, and I can set one up at mine. She has no intention of trying to get full custody or anything like that. She doesn't want to keep me from being involved in my child's life. How generous of her. She went back downstairs, and I followed her. He was still standing there in the living room, so I walked up to him and punched him. He stumbled back and fell into a table. She yelled, "What the f***?" and ran over to him. I don't even care at this point. As if he's going to call the cops? He deserved it, and it wouldn't have happened had he just left like I told him to. Several hours later she texted me to apologize for today. She insisted he really meant what he said, that he's actually a good guy who cares about her and respects me. What the f***? He respects me? He was screwing my wife in the gym locker room. I was like, you can't be serious. She said, fine. I'm trying to have a mature conversation about this. I can't help that we fell in love. Believe it or not, I'm not trying to hurt you, and I want everything to be amicable. This guy stole my wife, and now he's stealing my kid too. Sure, I'm the biological father, but now they're setting up a nursery together in his house? I've tried not to feel jealous or sad. I've tried to maintain the thought that he's the trash man who picked up my garbage. Sometimes I feel that way, but the truth is that I loved her and still do. I don't want to stay married to her on principle alone, but this is devastating to me. New update. Another installment of the implosion, which is my marriage on April 10, 2024. My wife is now about 26 weeks pregnant. There hasn't been much drama with her and her affair partner recently. I took a long weekend away last week, and it was nice to get some distance from home for a while. The only really annoying thing that's happened is when I told her I would be in the delivery room, not him. After everything she's done, she owes me that. It's not his baby. He has no right or reason to be there. I will not be the one waiting outside when my child is being born. She initially agreed, saying she never planned to have him there. When I asked if she had told him, she said no. I told her to inform him that he wouldn't be part of it. Well, she told him, and apparently, he didn't take it well. He started trying to convince her why he should be there. Next thing I know, she's telling me that he really wants to be there, and since she's the one giving birth, she should be able to decide who is present. Now she wants him there. I suppose he'll start making name suggestions soon and try to override the names we've had picked out for years. We've had some discussions, and she told me I can have our house and the dog in our divorce. I've requested that we sell the house and split the profit. I've already had that written into the paperwork. I'm not buying her out of our house, a house that I've made all the payments on anyway. I have a much better credit score than she does and less debt. I compromised a lot because she liked this house. I'd rather get my own place based solely on what I want, with no reminders of her. And there was never any way she was getting the dog. I have proof that I own him, so she wouldn't stand a chance of winning him in court. It's the one thing I told my lawyer I wanted above everything else, not including custody issues regarding my actual child. Honestly, her affair partner can have her, but he will never have my dog. Not to mention, my dog is 100 times more loyal than my wife, and some might even say, better looking too. Given that I won't be living here much longer after the baby is born, if everything moves quickly, I've decided to still prepare a nursery here anyway, in case anyone wants to accuse me of not being invested or prepared for fatherhood. I'm trying to look at the positives. It doesn't matter what colors she likes or what themes she prefers. I can do whatever I want. Honestly, we've been together for so long and have lived together for most of our adult lives. It's sort of nice not living with someone, but also sort of lonely. I have friends and family, but it's hard to feel in the mood to go out or hang out with people too often. They always ask me about everything that's going on, and I'm tired of that being the topic of conversation. I got a promotion at work, which financially would have been better had it happened after the divorce, but I'll take what I can get. I feel like I'm living in limbo right now, and a lot of what I do is always framed around, how will this affect me in the divorce? Admittedly, I spy on them on social media sometimes. I guess I'm hoping to see he's been in a motorcycle accident or something now that the weather is nicer. Hasn't happened yet, but he's starting a new company, and once that's up and running, I can always get all my friends and family to leave 1-star reviews everywhere. Have to find ways to have a little fun. Sorry that I don't respond to a lot of messages or comments. Sometimes I just take big breaks from looking at Reddit since it can be depressing as hell. Editing to add something I forgot. She told her family that we've split up and that she's with this other guy now. Her sister reached out to me to say how sorry she was, calling her sister a dumbass and that sort of thing. She told me that my wife was complaining about her affair partner. She said the sex is over when he's done and apparently he's really selfish in bed. He doesn't do the little things she's used to, like clearing the snow off her car in the morning and heating it up or offering to make her food after a long day. He doesn't speak her love language, and hangs out with his friends too much. This made me so happy to hear. She's secretly miserable, and I find that absolutely delightful. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. Our autistic son committed suicide today, and our other children blame us for mistreating him. Now my daughter has stopped talking to us. My husband and I have had 3 children, James, 27 male, Kate, 23 female, and Stephen, 20 male. When Stephen was 6 years old, he was diagnosed with autism. The diagnosis came as a shock to our family, but we immediately took action to provide him with all the support and accommodations he needed. We researched extensively about autism, consulted with specialists, and enrolled Stephen in various therapies designed to help him develop social, communication, and behavioral skills. Despite our efforts, Stephen resisted from the very beginning. He was adamant that he did not want any special treatment or help. He would often tell us that he wanted to be treated like a normal person, and not be singled out because of his condition. We tried to reassure him, explaining that the help we were providing was necessary for him to achieve the same results as other children his age. We encouraged him to accept himself, be proud of who he was, and not to let society's opinions or expectations influence him. Our community was incredibly supportive, with teachers, friends, and family members all doing their best to accommodate Stephen and make him feel included. However, Stephen's perception was different. He felt that by receiving special treatment, he was being treated like a subhuman. He believed he was just as competent as his peers and had been so even before his diagnosis. The interventions, which were meant to support him, felt to him like an indication that he was deficient or incapable. Whenever someone tried to help him, whether it was a teacher offering additional time for tests or a therapist providing strategies to manage social interactions, Stephen would firmly refuse. He would explain that he didn't want or need any help and would often come up with excuses to avoid these interactions. His refusals were consistent and passionate, and no amount of reasoning or reassurance could change his mind. As parents, we were caught in a difficult situation. On one hand, we wanted to respect Stephen's wishes and treat him as he desired. On the other hand, we knew that the support and accommodations were crucial for his development and well-being. This conflict created a strain in our relationship with Stephen, as he became increasingly frustrated with our attempts to help him, and we became more desperate to ensure he received the support he needed. As Stephen grew older, his struggle with his autism diagnosis deepened. His desire to be seen and treated as a normal person intensified, leading him to take drastic measures to distance himself from the label of being autistic. This period marked a significant shift in his behavior and relationships with those around him. In his early years, Stephen had reluctantly tolerated the special accommodations and support provided by his teachers and therapists. However, as he approached adolescence, his resentment towards these interventions grew. He began to isolate himself, withdrawing from social interactions and friendships. He would often come home from school and retreat to his room, spending hours alone, away from the family. He avoided participating in family gatherings and extracurricular activities, preferring solitude over the risk of being perceived as different. The turning point came when Stephen was around 13 years old. He approached us with a request that both broke our hearts and left us conflicted. He wanted to transfer to a different school where no one knew about his autism diagnosis. Stephen believed that by starting fresh in a new environment, he could shed the label that he felt had defined and limited him for so many years. He was convinced that if no one knew about his condition, he would finally be able to live the normal life he had always yearned for. Stephen's plea was desperate and heartfelt. He explained that at his current school, everyone saw him through the lens of his diagnosis. Teachers, despite their good intentions, treated him with a level of caution and pity that made him feel inadequate. His classmates, though generally kind, often kept a distance, likely unsure of how to interact with him without causing offense. This environment, Stephen argued, was stifling his ability to form genuine connections and achieve his full potential. Despite understanding his perspective, we, as his parents, were deeply concerned. We feared that without the support systems in place at his current school, Stephen would struggle even more. The specialized attention, the individualized education plans, and the trained staff were all there to help him succeed. We worried that a new school, unaware of his needs, would not provide the necessary accommodations, leading to greater challenges and setbacks. Moreover, we were afraid that keeping his autism a secret would place an immense amount of pressure on Stephen. The effort to hide such a significant part of his identity could exacerbate his anxiety and depression. We believed that acceptance and self-advocacy were crucial for his long-term well-being, and we hoped that he would eventually see the value in the support we insisted on providing. Our decision to deny his request was met with intense anger and disappointment from Stephen. He felt betrayed and unheard, convinced that we were not considering his feelings or desires. This decision created a rift between us that grew wider with each passing year. Stephen's behavior became more withdrawn, his interactions with us more strained. He began to view our insistence on support as a form of control rather than care, further deepening his sense of isolation and resentment. By the time Stephen reached his early teens, the weight of his unresolved feelings and the ongoing struggle with his autism diagnosis culminated in a severe depression. His once manageable frustrations had grown into a deep and consuming despair. Stephen's mental health deteriorated rapidly, and he became increasingly withdrawn and despondent. The joy and curiosity that once characterized his childhood were replaced by a pervasive sense of hopelessness and isolation. Stephen's depression was exacerbated by his adamant refusal to accept any form of help. By this point, his rejection of support extended beyond his autism. He declined medication and refused to attend therapy sessions, even though these were critical for addressing his mental health. To him, any form of assistance symbolized the special treatment that he so vehemently despised. He believed that accepting help would further cement the perception that he was different and incapable, a notion he was desperate to escape. In his eyes, the root cause of his depression was the special treatment he received because of his autism. Stephen felt that the accommodations and interventions, though well-intentioned, isolated him from his peers, and labeled him as someone who needed constant support. He longed to live a life free from these constraints, to experience a semblance of normalcy that he felt had been denied to him. In a moment of clarity, amidst his turmoil, Stephen proposed a compromise. He offered to seek treatment for his depression if we agreed to let him transfer to a different school where no one knew about his autism. He believed that a fresh start in an environment free from preconceived notions would allow him to live the normal life he craved. This proposal was supported by his siblings, James and Kate, and a few of his teachers, who saw it as a potential path to improvement. However, the idea of Stephen transferring to a new school without any disclosure of his autism filled us with apprehension. We were deeply concerned that without the necessary support systems, Stephen would face even greater challenges. The fear that he might struggle academically and socially without the accommodations he needed weighed heavily on our decision. Despite the encouragement from those around us, we ultimately decided against his request, believing it was in his best interest to remain in an environment where he had access to the support he required. Stephen's reaction to our decision was one of profound disappointment and anger. He felt unheard and invalidated, convinced that we were prioritizing our fears over his well-being. This decision became a significant point of contention and further strained our already fragile relationship. The situation reached a tragic climax when Stephen was 15. The weight of his depression and his feelings of entrapment led him to a point of utter despair. One night he attempted to take his own life by hanging himself. The discovery was a moment of sheer horror and heartbreak for our family. Thankfully, Stephen survived the attempt, but the incident left deep emotional scars on all of us. When Stephen turned 18, he graduated from high school and was accepted into his dream university. The pride and joy we felt for his achievement were quickly overshadowed by a devastating blow. Stephen packed his belongings, moved out, and cut off all contact with my husband and me. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment for years, a chance to break free from what he saw as the chains of our support and care. He maintained contact with his siblings, James and Kate, but for us, he had only anger and bitterness. He left behind an angry goodbye letter, the contents of which still haunt us. In it, he accused us of ruining 12 years of his life. He claimed that our insistence on providing him with special treatment and help had made him feel crazy, stupid, and awkward, someone who needed help for everything. Stephen wrote that we were the reason he was still depressed and suicidal. His words were filled with a passion that cut deep into our hearts. "I hate you with a passion," he declared. Stephen believed that by leaving, he could finally live a normal life, free from the constant reminders of his autism and the special treatment he had always resisted. He wanted to be seen as competent and capable, not as someone defined by a diagnosis. To him, moving out was a chance to start anew, to redefine himself away from the shadow of our overprotectiveness. We were heartbroken and desperate to reach out to him. We tried calling him, sending letters, and emailing, hoping to mend the rift that had grown between us. But Stephen was resolute in his silence. Each attempt to contact him was met with a cold, unyielding wall. It was clear that he was determined to sever ties completely. Our concern for Stephen's well-being drove us to visit him at his university, despite knowing that our presence might be unwelcome. We hoped that seeing us in person might soften his resolve, that he might be willing to talk and perhaps find some common ground. But our visit only seemed to fuel his anger. He refused to engage with us, his demeanor cold and distant. When it became clear that we wouldn't leave, he threatened to get a restraining order. The threat was enough to make us back off, realizing that our presence was causing him more distress than comfort. Since that visit, we have had no direct contact with Stephen. Our only glimpses into his life come through James and Kate, who tell us that he seems to be doing better now, despite still struggling with depression. It's a small comfort to know that he's managing, but the pain of his absence and the unresolved conflict between us remains a constant ache. Anyway, today he committed suicide. The words still don't seem real. Our youngest, our Stephen, is gone. From what we know, he overdosed on medication. The news came through Kate, who had always been close to her brother. Her voice on the phone was strained, almost breaking. She didn't just bring the news of Stephen's death, she brought a torrent of accusations and pain. Kate told us that Stephen's suicide was our fault. She said that by giving him special treatment and not stopping when he asked us to, we had driven him to this. "You should have listened to him," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You should have let him be who he wanted to be. You failed as parents, and I don't know if I can forgive you for that." Hearing our daughter say these words felt like a dagger to the heart. James, who had been quiet during the conversation, finally spoke up. He echoed Kate's sentiments, saying that we should at least acknowledge our mistake. He believed that by forcing Stephen into a mold we thought was best, we had only pushed him further into despair. The argument that followed was heated. Kate was furious, her eyes flashing with a mix of grief and anger. She packed her things hastily, her movements sharp and decisive. She had planned to stay for New Year's, a time we had hoped would bring some healing to our fractured family. But now, she was leaving. And she might not come back. "If you want to keep a relationship with me, you need to admit what you did wrong," Kate said as she stood by the door, her suitcase in hand. "You need to learn from this. Otherwise, I don't want people like you as parents." Her words lingered in the air long after she left. My husband and I were left standing in the living room, the silence around us thick and oppressive. We had always believed we were doing the right thing for Stephen, providing him with the support and care he needed. But now, in the face of his death and our children's accusations, everything we had believed was thrown into question. We tried to defend our actions, saying that society's standards and expectations were to blame. That Stephen's own refusal to accept help had played a role. But deep down, the doubt gnawed at us. Had we been too rigid, too insistent on what we thought was best? Had we failed to see Stephen's needs and desires for what they truly were? The loss of Stephen was a wound that would never heal, but now it seemed we were also losing Kate and possibly James. The house felt emptier than ever, filled with echoes of what once was. We were left to grapple with our grief and the heavy burden of potential mistakes. We were devastated, torn between our conviction and the painful reality that we might have driven our son to his death. Update. Tomorrow would have been the 21st birthday of our son, Stephen, who took his life almost a year ago. The approaching date looms over us, casting a shadow that we can't escape. We've tried to distract ourselves, burying our sorrow in mundane tasks and half-hearted attempts at normalcy, but with Stephen's birthday so close, he is all we can think about. The memories flood back, each one a reminder of the son we lost and the children who have abandoned us. Stephen never liked celebrating his birthday. He saw it as a marker of time passing, a reminder that yet another year had gone by without things getting better. For us, his birthday was always a bittersweet day, a time to celebrate his life while grappling with the reality of his struggles. Now, it is a day filled with an aching void, a stark reminder of what we have lost. We miss him so much that it feels like a physical pain, a wound that refuses to heal. Our daughter, Kate, completely stopped talking to us about 10 months ago. The last words she spoke to us were filled with anger and blame. According to her, we are responsible for Stephen's suicide. She believes that our insistence on special treatment, and our refusal to see things from Stephen's perspective drove him to take his own life. It was about 1.5 months after Stephen's death that she cut off all contact with us, unable to forgive what she saw as our unforgivable mistake. At the time of his suicide, Stephen had already been out of contact with us for over a year. He had left, cutting ties and seeking a life where he wasn't defined by his diagnosis. Kate's anger is palpable, and while we tried to reach out to her, our efforts were in vain. She doesn't respond to our messages, and any attempt to visit her has been fruitless. Her brother, James, still talks to her regularly, but even he refuses to help bridge the gap. He believes that Kate has every right to distance herself from us and shares her belief that our actions contributed to Stephen's death. James's stance only deepens our sense of isolation. He tells us that Kate doesn't have to talk to us if she doesn't want to, reinforcing the idea that we are to blame. The loss of Stephen and the estrangement from our remaining children feels like a punishment without end. We reach out to Kate on social media, hoping for a response, a sign that she might still care. But our messages go unanswered, lost in the void of her silence. We knew where she lived until recently. We visited her old apartment, hoping for a chance to speak with her face to face, but she was never home. According to James, she moved to New York City this past September to enroll in a PhD program. Now we don't even know where she lives. The distance between us is no longer just emotional, but physical as well. The house feels empty, the silence a constant reminder of the family we once had. We are left with our grief and our memories, clinging to the hope that one day, Kate might find it in her heart to forgive us, that James might see that we were trying to do what we thought was best. Until then, we are adrift in our sorrow, missing Stephen, and yearning for the children who have turned away from us. Update. My husband has had a drinking problem for somewhat over 2 years now. His drink of choice is usually vodka, but he occasionally switches to wine. On weekdays, he consumes 2 to 5 shots of vodka, but on weekends, his intake can skyrocket to an entire bottle. When he drinks wine, it's even more excessive. He'll drink an entire bottle during the week, often escalating to 2 bottles on weekends. When he's drunk, he becomes extremely angry. Though he doesn't get physically aggressive, his yelling and screaming fill the house with a palpable tension. Our interactions have dwindled to the occasional few hours on a weekend when he's momentarily sober, but even that time is marred by the looming threat of his next drink. He begins drinking as soon as he gets home on workdays and often starts around noon on weekends, leaving little room for meaningful connection. His drinking problem ebbs and flows. With my help, he has managed to regain control multiple times. During these periods, although he still drinks almost every day, it's usually not enough to get him drunk. But inevitably, things deteriorate again. The cycle of hope and despair is exhausting. Each time he falls back into heavy drinking, it feels like I lose a little more of him. The roots of his drinking problem trace back to about 2 years ago. It started when our youngest son, Stephen, applied to university without our knowledge, and then cut off all contact once he left for school. The betrayal and anger my husband felt over Stephen's actions were profound. The son he had tried so hard to help and protect had chosen to sever ties. The sense of failure and loss drove my husband to seek solace in alcohol. Before this, he was a moderate drinker. He would have a drink only on special occasions like holidays, parties, and date nights, and even then, he almost never had enough to get drunk. But now, the man I married seems to be slipping away. His drinking has created a chasm between us, one that grows wider with each passing day. The moments when he's not drinking are overshadowed by the tension and the inevitable descent into another bout of heavy drinking. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now echoes with his angry outbursts and my silent despair. I feel like I've lost him since his drinking problem began. At least during the waves when it's really bad, he is drunk most of the time, and then all he does is just scream around. The person he becomes under the influence is a stranger to me, angry, bitter, and unreachable. We are slowly drifting apart, and I fear that if things don't change, the gap between us will become insurmountable. Our once strong bond is fraying, and the love that held us together is being eroded by the relentless tide of his alcoholism. I long for the days when we were a team, facing life's challenges together. Now, it feels like I am battling this alone, trying to hold on to the remnants of our relationship while he drowns his pain in alcohol. I don't know how to reach him anymore, and with each passing day, the hope that we can find our way back to each other diminishes. The weight of Stephen's absence and the strain of my husband's drinking problem are pulling us under, and I don't know if we have the strength to resurface. Reflecting on everything that has happened, there are some hard lessons we've learned through this painful journey. The importance of truly listening to our loved ones. I remember countless conversations with Stephen where he pleaded with us to stop the special treatment. He insisted that he didn't want it, that he just wanted to be treated like everyone else. But we, believing we knew what was best, kept pushing. We thought we were helping him, but in reality, we were only pushing him further away. Stephen's eyes would fill with frustration every time we brought up therapy or special accommodations. "I don't need this," he would say. his voice tinged with desperation. But we couldn't see past our own beliefs, convinced that we were doing the right thing. It was only after his passing that we truly understood the weight of our actions. Sometimes, listening and respecting the wishes of those we care about can be more beneficial than imposing our own beliefs. Stephen needed us to hear him, to understand his desire for normalcy, but our insistence on what we thought was best created a rift that ultimately became insurmountable. Had we listened more and tried to see things from Stephen's perspective, perhaps things might have turned out differently. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My boyfriend provided only superficial care when I was battling uterine cancer. He even scheduled knee surgery to avoid the responsibility of caring for me. My name is Elizabeth Bennett, and I am 51 years old. Life, with all its unexpected turns and twists, has brought me here. Standing at a crossroads in a relationship that has given me 7 years of companionship, but now leaves me questioning what true partnership means, especially in times of crisis. This contemplation of my relationship with James, my boyfriend, comes at a time when my life has been overshadowed by a recent, serious cancer diagnosis. James and I met almost exactly 7 years ago, a chance encounter that neither of us was looking for but seemed destined all the same. I was at a local bookstore, rummaging through shelves looking for a rare edition of Jane Austen's novels, a passion of mine since my teenage years. He was there too, not particularly interested in books but trying to find a thoughtful gift for his sister. Our hands reached for the same prized copy of Pride and Prejudice. Our eyes met, and in that awkward laughter that followed our tussle over the book, something clicked. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was certainly curiosity that wanted to know more. From there, our relationship grew steadily, if somewhat cautiously. We were both coming from the wounds of previous marriages that had left us skeptical of love. James, with his quiet demeanor and a fiercely independent streak, was initially a puzzle I felt compelled to solve. He had a quirky sense of humor and an intellect that challenged and intrigued me. His background in engineering and his penchant for solitary hobbies like woodworking and model building contrasted with my career in social work and my more extroverted nature. Despite these differences, or perhaps because of them, we found common ground. We enjoyed long drives, jazz music, and the quiet comfort of each other's presence without the need for constant conversation. Living arrangements came naturally over time. Although James moved into my house, a cozy Victorian I had secured after my divorce, our lives maintained a certain partition. The house was in my name, and we had no shared property. His private nature meant I had little insight into his financial matters, though he was never hesitant to contribute to household expenses or surprise me with groceries or an unexpected household repair. However, the idea of marriage was off the table for James. He valued his independence too much, often stating that love didn't need the bonds of legal ties to validate it. In many ways, I agreed, appreciating the simplicity of our arrangement where love was a choice we made daily, not a contract we were obliged to fulfill. Yet despite our harmonious living and the stability of our respective careers, there were aspects of our relationship that remained unfulfilled. James was never one for grand romantic gestures. Birthdays and anniversaries were often marked with little fanfare. Gifts were practical rather than thoughtful, and celebrations were muted, often just an evening out at a restaurant we both liked. This lack of romance was something I had come to terms with, focusing instead on the reliability and steadiness James offered. Our relationship, while not fiery or adorned with the typical trappings of romance, was functional and comfortable. We had a healthy sex life, and our discussions, though rarely about our emotions, were always respectful and insightful. Yet, as the years wore on, I sometimes found myself longing for a bit more warmth, a bit more of the unexpected, the small surprises that make the heart flutter. The true test of our relationship, however, began in January when I was diagnosed with late-stage ovarian cancer. The news came as a devastating blow, not just to me but to the fragile equilibrium of our relationship. Cancer, with its insidious tendrils, seemed determined not only to wreak havoc on my body but also to unearth the foundations of my relationship with James. The morning I received the diagnosis, the world seemed to pause. An eerie stillness that belied the storm raging inside me. Late-stage ovarian cancer, the doctor had said, his voice a blend of compassion and clinical detachment. The words echoed in my head as I drove home, each syllable a weighty gavel marking the end of one life phase and the uncertain beginning of another. Arriving home, I found James in the backyard, lost in his latest project, a birdhouse he was crafting with meticulous attention. The normalcy of the scene, set against the backdrop of my devastating news, felt surreal. I watched him for a moment, absorbed in his task, unaware of the seismic shift about to enter our lives. "James," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked up, a smile breaking across his face, but it faltered as he took in my expression. The tools fell silent, and he was at my side in an instant, his earlier levity replaced by concern. "I have cancer," I said, the words blunt, irrevocable. His arms came around me then, a strong, steady presence. But inside, my heart was a chaos of fear and sorrow. In the privacy of our living room, I laid out the stark realities of my condition. The cancer was aggressive, widespread, and the treatment would be grueling. I watched his face, the emotions flickering through his eyes, shock, pain, resolve. And then, I gave him an out. An opportunity to walk away before the journey became too difficult, too steeped in medical routines and the shadow of mortality. It was a test, not of his love, but of his willingness to face this harsh road alongside me. He didn't hesitate. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly, squeezing my hand. "I promise to be with you, for better or worse." His words should have brought comfort, and they did, to some extent. But they also stirred a tumult of emotions within me, gratitude, relief, but also a deep, gnawing apprehension. James's decision to stay with me through my cancer diagnosis should have been a source of unwavering comfort. In some ways, it was. In others, it highlighted the gaps in our relationship that I had long ignored or downplayed. As I navigated the labyrinth of surgeries and chemotherapy, my mixed feelings about his decision became increasingly pronounced. James's willingness to stay was commendable, but his ability to provide the emotional and physical care I needed was painfully lacking. The first major challenge came with my initial surgeries. The doctors performed a hysterectomy and several other procedures to remove as much of the cancer as possible. The recovery was brutal. I was in and out of the hospital, dealing with intense pain, nausea, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. James was there, but in a way that felt more obligatory than heartfelt. He drove me to the hospital, sat in the waiting room, and took me home afterward. But once we were home, his role as a caregiver faltered. Managing medications was the first hurdle. The schedule was complex, with different pills at different times, some with food, some without. James struggled to keep it straight, often forgetting doses or mixing up the timings. I tried to make it easier by writing everything down and setting alarms, but it quickly became clear that this was a responsibility beyond his comfort zone. He would get frustrated, not at me, but at the situation, at the helplessness he felt. His frustration manifested in a withdrawn demeanor, leaving me to fend for myself more often than not. Then there were the basics of caregiving, ensuring I was hydrated, bringing me food, checking in on my comfort. James tried, he really did, but his efforts were often half-hearted. He would bring me a glass of water and then retreat to his workshop or his computer. Meals were an afterthought, usually something quick and easy, lacking the nourishment and care I needed. I found myself relying on meal delivery services more and more, realizing that the emotional support I craved was not forthcoming. As the chemotherapy began, my world narrowed to a series of treatments and side effects. Chemo was a relentless adversary, sapping my strength, stealing my hair, and leaving me perpetually nauseous. Each session felt like a battle, and though James drove me to a few of them, his presence was more logistical than comforting. He would drop me off and pick me up, but during the treatments, it was my friends and family who sat with me, held my hand, and talked me through the worst of it. My best friend Sarah was a godsend. She organized a meal train, ensuring that I had nutritious food every day. She coordinated with my family, making sure someone was always available to help. My sister Kate flew in from out of state multiple times, staying with me for weeks at a time. She was a natural caregiver, intuitively knowing what I needed before I even had to ask. Between Sarah, Kate, and other friends who stepped up, I was surrounded by a network of support that filled the gaps James couldn't bridge. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of chemo, I lay in bed, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. James sat at his desk, absorbed in his work, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil I was in. I watched him, the man I loved, and wondered how we had come to this point. His promise to stay had been genuine, but the reality of what staying meant was something neither of us had fully understood. My birthday in April was a turning point. Despite my exhaustion and the constant nausea, I had managed to celebrate James's birthday just a few days earlier. I ordered him a gift from Amazon, bought his favorite takeout, and even mustered the energy to bake him a cake. It wasn't much, but it was a gesture of love and normalcy in a time when everything felt uncertain. When my birthday arrived, I hoped for something, anything, to show that he cared, that he was thinking of me, even in the smallest way. But the day came and went without acknowledgement. No card, no gift, not even a simple happy birthday. The hurt was sharp and immediate, a reminder of the emotional chasm that had always been there but was now impossible to ignore. I didn't need grand gestures. I needed to know that I mattered, that my pain and struggle were seen and acknowledged. His oversight felt like a betrayal, a confirmation of all the doubts that had been simmering beneath the surface. The upcoming surgery was another significant hurdle. Scheduled for mid-May, it was to be a major operation, a hysterectomy and debulking surgery to remove as much of the remaining cancer as possible. The recovery time was estimated at 4 weeks, a period during which I would be at my most vulnerable, needing constant care and support. James, in his pragmatic way, informed me that he had scheduled an elective knee surgery for just 2 days after my operation. His knee had been bothering him for years, but the timing of this decision was bewildering and hurtful. When I expressed my concern, he insisted that his knee pain had suddenly become unbearable and that the surgery couldn't be postponed. His explanation felt like an excuse, a way to avoid the discomfort of my recovery by focusing on his own issues. It was as if he was retreating from the emotional intensity of my illness, seeking refuge in his own pain. During the week leading up to my surgery, James took time off work. Not to be with me, but to go camping and hiking, his way of decompressing before what he saw as a challenging period ahead. He returned home tan and relaxed, ready for his knee procedure, while I was left feeling abandoned, my own surgery looming with a sense of impending dread. The day of my surgery arrived, and I was surrounded by my family and friends, their presence a balm to my anxiety. James was there too, but his focus seemed divided, already anticipating his own upcoming procedure. He stayed with me through the pre-op preparations and kissed me softly before I was wheeled into the operating room, but his touch felt distant, his mind elsewhere. The surgery was a success, the doctors told me, but the recovery was arduous. I was weak, in pain, and emotionally raw. While I was still in the hospital, James underwent his knee surgery and returned home on crutches. When I was finally discharged, it was my sister who brought me home, ensuring I had everything I needed. James, on crutches and struggling with his own discomfort, was hardly in a position to care for me. The irony was not lost on me. 2 patients under one roof, each needing more than the other could give. My friends and family continued to step in, their support unwavering. They brought meals, helped with household chores, and provided the emotional sustenance that was so desperately needed. One afternoon, as I lay on the couch, too weak to move, James called out from the bedroom, asking if I could bring him some water. I stared at the ceiling, the absurdity of the situation sinking in. Here I was, barely able to care for myself, being asked to care for him. It was a moment of clarity, a painful realization that this relationship, as it stood, was untenable. James's aunt called me a few days later, her voice filled with concern. She had heard about my surgery and wanted to wish me well. She also expressed her surprise and disappointment at James's decision to have his knee surgery at such a critical time. "I believe he's experiencing some form of PTSD," she said gently. "His mother died of brain cancer when he was a teenager. She went through years of surgeries and treatments that ultimately failed. This behavior is out of character for him." Her words offered some explanation but no comfort. James's past, his trauma, didn't absolve him of his current actions. I could understand his fear, his retreat. But I couldn't accept it. Not when my own needs were so immediate and profound. As I embarked on the long and arduous road to recovery following my major surgery, the physical challenges were compounded by the emotional toll of navigating my relationship with James. Each day was a battle, not just against the cancer and the pain it brought, but also against the growing realization that the man I loved might not be the partner I needed in this crucial time. During the initial weeks of recovery, the intensity of my physical pain was matched only by the emotional strain of watching James focus largely on himself. While I struggled with the simplest tasks, grappling with my newfound frailty, James was absorbed with his own recovery from his knee surgery. His requests for help with tasks he couldn't manage on his crutches, even as I could barely manage my own needs, felt like a glaring testament to his self-centered approach. Lying on my bed one afternoon, the sounds of James fumbling in the kitchen trying to make himself lunch while I rested, I couldn't help but reflect on our situation. Is this what our relationship has come to? I thought. 2 people living under the same roof, each wrapped up in their own pain, unable to support each other? This internal monologue was a constant during those days, as I wrestled with my feelings of disappointment and abandonment. One evening, as I shared these thoughts over the phone with my sister Kate, she provided the kind of blunt assessment that only someone who loves you deeply can offer. "Liz, you've always known James wasn't great with emotional stuff. But this is different. This isn't just emotional support, it's basic care, compassion. You're recovering from cancer surgery, for heaven's sake. If he can't step up now, when will he ever?" Her words struck a chord. It wasn't just that James was failing to care for me. It was his apparent lack of insight into how his actions, or lack thereof, affected me. This conversation with Kate sparked a series of internal questions about the viability of our relationship. I found myself wondering if his inability to provide support was something I could live with in the long term, especially knowing that my battle with cancer could bring more challenges ahead. I also had long heart-to-hearts with Sarah, who had been instrumental in organizing support during my treatment. During one of her visits, as she sat by my bedside, I confided in her. "He's not mean, Sarah. He's just absent. I feel like I'm going through this alone, even though he's right here." Sarah took my hand, her presence a comforting anchor. "Liz, it's okay to acknowledge that something isn't working. It's okay to want more. You need a partner, especially now. It's not just about having someone physically present. You need someone who's truly with you, in every sense." These conversations, along with my own reflections, led me to a profound understanding. My need for a supportive partner was not just a preference but a necessity, especially as I faced the uncertainty of my health. James's focus on his own issues during my time of greatest need had illuminated a fundamental disconnect in our relationship. It was not merely about his lack of caregiving skills. It was about his inability to prioritize my needs during a critical time. This realization brought clarity but also sorrow. I grieved for the relationship that could not withstand the trials we faced. I mourned the future I had once envisioned with James, now overshadowed by the stark reality of our present circumstances. My decision to address these issues with James was not made lightly. I chose a quiet evening, a few weeks into my recovery, when I felt strong enough to have what I knew would be a challenging conversation. "James," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We need to talk about us, about how things have been since my surgery. I feel like I'm going through this recovery on my own, and it's made me think a lot about our future." James looked surprised, perhaps a little defensive. "I've been dealing with my knee," he started, but I gently cut him off. "I know, and I understand that's been hard on you. But I can't help feeling like we're not really here for each other. Not in the way I need us to be. This isn't just about now, it's about what this says for our future." The conversation that followed was painful, filled with moments of silence and mutual recognition of the painful truth. James admitted his struggles with facing my illness, echoing what his aunt had shared about his past. Yet understanding his reasons didn't alleviate the reality of my loneliness and the growing gap between us. As we talked, it became clear that our paths were diverging. The love and commitment that had once bound us were not enough to bridge the gap that had formed between our experiences and needs. Deciding to redefine our relationship was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. Yet it was also a decision that brought me peace. In recognizing our limitations and acknowledging our needs, we were able to part ways with respect and a deep understanding of each other's struggles. The weeks following our conversation were a time of adjustment. As James moved out and we began our separate lives, I continued to lean on my support network. The love and care from my friends and family were instrumental in my recovery. They provided not just practical help but emotional sustenance, helping me rebuild my strength and reclaim my independence. Reflecting on this period, I realized that my journey through cancer and recovery was also a journey of self-discovery. I learned the importance of asking for what I need, of surrounding myself with people who can truly support me, and of letting go when a relationship no longer serves my best interests. In facing the end of my relationship with James, I found a new beginning for myself, one defined by resilience, hope, and the unwavering support of those who love me. Update. Reflecting on the tumultuous period of my life that followed my cancer diagnosis, I find a mixture of sorrow and clarity. When James promised he'd never leave me after I told him about my illness, I clung to that promise as a beacon of hope. Yet the reality of his presence, detached and insufficient, contrasted sharply with his words. It's a stark reminder of how adversity can reveal the true essence of a person's character and commitment. In the beginning, my heart was filled with gratitude when James said he would stay. However, as my treatment progressed and the demands of caregiving became apparent, his emotional withdrawal became increasingly obvious. It was like living with a shadow of the person I thought I knew. His physical presence in the house didn't translate into the emotional or practical support I desperately needed. It felt as though he was there, but not really with me. This was not just a failure to perform tasks. It was an absence of the compassion and partnership I needed at my most vulnerable. This experience forced me to confront a painful reality reflected in the grim statistics I had read about partners who leave or emotionally check out during illness. It was heartbreaking to recognize that James fit into this narrative. Despite his promise, he wasn't really with me. He was more of a roommate, and not a particularly good one at that, rather than the partner I needed him to be. His inability to support me, which I had hoped might be overcome by the gravity of my situation, seemed instead to deepen the existing fissures between us. My feelings of guilt, while natural, were also a reflection of the empathy and consideration I always strived to offer, even when it wasn't reciprocated. I realized these feelings were misplaced. I was battling cancer, fighting for my life, and also grappling with the emotional neglect from someone who was supposed to be my primary source of support. This realization was crushing but necessary. It wasn't just about the tasks he failed to perform. It was about his failure to be the emotional anchor I needed. Understanding that James's behavior might have been influenced by his own fears or past trauma, perhaps a PTSD response from his mother's death due to cancer, provided some context but no solace. It explained some of his actions but did not excuse them. While compassion for his struggles is important, it should not come at the expense of my own well-being. My health and emotional needs had to take precedence. The possibility that James hadn't left due to financial dependence or his own resentment about feeling trapped added another layer of complexity to our dynamic. It hinted at a relationship sustained not by mutual support and love but by circumstances and convenience, which perhaps made him act out or retreat into himself. Throughout this ordeal, I gave James numerous opportunities to rise to the occasion. Time and again, he showed that he either could not or would not meet the needs of the moment. This was not just about what he hadn't done. It was about what I needed and deserved and was not receiving. Recognizing this was crucial. It forced me to make hard decisions about what was best for my health and happiness. Navigating the end of our relationship was not easy, but it was necessary. I leaned heavily on my family, friends, and the broader support network I was fortunate to have. They showed up for me in ways that James did not, providing not only the practical support I needed but also the emotional care that helped sustain me through one of the most challenging times of my life. As I look back, I understand that it's okay to prioritize my well-being and to feel sad about the end of a relationship while also recognizing that it's the healthiest choice for me. Letting go of James was not just about ending a relationship that was no longer working. It was about reclaiming my life and focusing on my recovery with the support of people who truly cared for me. In this reflection, there is both loss and liberation. I mourn the partner James could not be but celebrate the strength I found in myself and the love and support from others that illuminated my darkest days. This journey has taught me about the resilience of the human spirit, the importance of self-care, and the power of a supportive community. As I continue to heal and rebuild my life, I carry these lessons with me, grateful for the clarity and purpose they have brought into my life. My partner often shows extreme jealousy and recently became paranoid, believing my new stretch marks were scratches indicating infidelity. My name is Emily, a 24-year-old woman navigating the intricate dance of love and life with my boyfriend Jack, who is 25. We've been together for 3 years, a period marked by highs and lows, laughter and tears, and the steady march towards understanding and trust. Our relationship began in the most unassuming of ways. A chance encounter at a mutual friend's barbecue. I remember the day vividly, the smell of grilled burgers wafting through the air, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, and the warm summer breeze that seemed to whisper promises of something special. Jack and I were introduced by our friend Sarah, who had been trying to set us up for months. I was initially hesitant, having just come out of a tumultuous relationship, but Jack's easy smile and genuine interest in getting to know me slowly chipped away at my reservations. Our first conversation was about our mutual love for hiking, and it wasn't long before we were planning weekend trips to nearby trails. Those early days were filled with discovery and excitement, the kind of heady rush that comes with new love. Fast forward to the present, and we've settled into a cozy rhythm. We share a modest apartment in the city, a 2-bedroom space that we've made our own with mismatched furniture and walls adorned with photos from our adventures. Jack works as a software developer, a job that keeps him busy but allows for a flexible schedule. I, on the other hand, work as a freelance writer, a career that lets me work from home and be my own boss. Our living situation is comfortable, and though we have our disagreements, we've managed to build a life that feels stable and supportive. Recently, I've been on a personal journey to gain weight. For most of my life, I've struggled with being slightly underweight, a condition that left me feeling self-conscious and often drained my energy. With Jack's encouragement and my own determination, I embarked on a mission to put on some pounds in a healthy way. I started eating more balanced meals, incorporating strength training into my exercise routine, and keeping a close eye on my progress. In a few short months, I managed to gain about 7 pounds, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of accomplishment when I looked in the mirror. However, this newfound weight came with unexpected changes. My body, adjusting to the rapid increase, began to show signs of stretching skin. Bright red and purple marks appeared on my thighs and buttocks. Stretch marks, a normal but surprising result of my efforts. I did my best to embrace them, reminding myself that they were a testament to my hard work and dedication to improving my health. Jack was supportive, often complimenting me on my progress and reassuring me that the stretch marks were nothing to be ashamed of. A typical day in our lives starts with the soft beep of Jack's alarm clock at 6:30 a.m. He's an early riser, often heading out for a morning run before diving into his work. I usually wake up around 7 a.m., greeted by the aroma of fresh coffee that Jack prepares before leaving for his run. Mornings are my favorite time of day, a quiet period where I can gather my thoughts and plan my tasks. I sit by the window with my coffee, watching the city come to life, and then settle down at my desk to write. Jack returns from his run around 8 a.m., sweaty but invigorated. We have breakfast together, a simple meal of eggs and toast, sometimes accompanied by a smoothie. Our conversations during breakfast are a mix of work plans, random musings, and shared jokes. After breakfast, Jack heads to his home office, and I return to my writing. The next few hours are spent in productive silence, punctuated by the occasional query or shared snippet from our respective tasks. By lunchtime, we both need a break. We usually eat together, taking the time to reconnect and discuss our progress. Afternoons are a bit more relaxed. Jack might have a few video calls, while I take a walk to clear my head or run some errands. Evenings are our time. We cook dinner together, experiment with new recipes, or indulge in our favorite comfort foods. After dinner, we might watch a movie, play a board game, or simply talk about our day. It's a routine that we've grown accustomed to, a comforting pattern that reinforces our bond. On the day everything changed, our routine started as usual. Jack had gone for his morning run, and I was enjoying my coffee by the window. The sky was a pale blue, streaked with the golden hues of dawn. Birds chirped outside, adding a melodic backdrop to the quiet of our apartment. I relished these moments of solitude, savoring the warmth of the coffee mug in my hands and the peacefulness of the early hour. I had planned to spend the day working on a new article about sustainable living practices, a topic I was passionate about. My notes were spread out on the desk, ready for me to dive into once I finished my coffee. Jack, meanwhile, had a series of meetings lined up for the day. He worked from home most of the time, his job as a software developer allowing him the flexibility to be present, even if his mind was often absorbed in code and algorithms. The morning passed without incident. Jack returned from his run, flushed and energized, and we enjoyed a hearty breakfast together. We talked about our plans for the day and shared a few laughs over a funny video I had found online. After breakfast, we retreated to our respective workspaces. I immersed myself in my writing, the hours slipping by as I crafted sentences and organized my thoughts. By noon the sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow through the windows. We met for lunch, as we always did, a small ritual that helped us stay connected despite our busy schedules. Jack had made sandwiches, and we sat at the kitchen table, chatting about our work and upcoming plans. It was during this light-hearted conversation about an upcoming trip to the mountains that Jack first noticed the marks. We had been planning this trip for weeks, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and reconnect with nature. I was excitedly talking about the hiking trails and the cozy cabin we had booked when I noticed Jack's gaze drift downward. "Emily, what are those marks on your butt?" he asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and concern. I glanced down, momentarily confused before realizing he had noticed the stretch marks that had recently appeared. I felt a flush of embarrassment but quickly composed myself. "Oh, those are just stretch marks," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. "I've been gaining some weight, remember? It's just my skin adjusting." Jack's frown deepened. "They don't look like stretch marks. They look more like scratches." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. I felt a pang of frustration and sadness. "Jack, they're stretch marks. They might look red and angry now, but that's just because they're new. They come from underneath the skin, not from the outside." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly as he examined them, but his expression remained unreadable. The room, once filled with the lightness of a leisurely day, now seemed to close in on us with a tangible tension. He stared at me, his expression a mix of disbelief and confusion. "Are you sure? They really don't look like stretch marks to me." I nodded, trying to stay calm. "Yes, I'm sure. You can even look it up if you want. Stretch marks can look different on different people, but that's what they are." "Are you accusing me of lying?" I asked, the hurt clear in my voice. It was the first time in our 3-year relationship that I felt a chasm of mistrust opening between us. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, his eyes shifted away from me, fixing on the floor as if it held the answer he needed. Without a word, tears welled up in his eyes, an unusual sight for Michael, who always prided himself on his composure. I reached out to touch his arm, but he gently pulled away and left the room, leaving me alone with a mix of emotions swirling inside me. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the apartment, marking his departure as clearly as it shattered the peace of our day. The hours that followed were long and heavy. I sat on the edge of the bed, the indentations of his fingers still visible on my skin, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. I couldn't understand where his sudden doubt had stemmed from. Had I missed signs of his insecurities before this? My thoughts spiraled, touching each memory, trying to find evidence of mistrust I might have overlooked. When Michael finally returned, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the room that seemed to echo the darkness settling between us. I knew we needed to talk, to clear the air, or the gap that had opened up would only widen. "I want to talk about earlier," I started as soon as I saw him. He nodded, his face weary, his usual bright eyes dimmed. We sat down together, the space on the couch between us feeling like a gulf. "Do you have any reason not to trust me, or do you need reassurance or more attention in our relationship?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. It was crucial to understand his perspective, even if his suspicions had hurt me deeply. He stayed silent for a long time, his eyes not meeting mine. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "No, but those marks, they don't make sense," he admitted, sounding as confused as he was uncertain. Trying to bridge the distance between us, I offered. "You can go through my phone whenever you want to," hoping transparency would reassure him. "Maybe you should talk to one of your friends about it," I added, thinking that perhaps external support might help him process his feelings better than I could alone. But he didn't like that suggestion. His face closed off, and he stood abruptly. "I don't need to talk to anyone," he said sharply, then stormed off to the other room, leaving me once again alone, the weight of our unresolved conflict pressing down on me like a physical force. We had not spoken since. As the door slammed shut behind Michael, the sharp sound seemed to cleave the air, leaving a palpable silence that settled heavily around me. Left alone in the diminishing light of the evening, I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, as if the open window was allowing the chill from outside to seep into the apartment, and into the spaces between us. In the quiet that followed, my mind began to whirl with thoughts and emotions. Shock was the first to settle in, thick and suffocating. I never imagined that Michael, the person I trusted most in the world, could suggest, even indirectly, that I might be unfaithful. The absurdity of his accusation that my stretch marks were scratches from someone else's nails was bewildering. Confusion followed close behind the shock. Why would Michael think such a thing? We had always been open with each other, sharing our thoughts and feelings without hesitation. This level of mistrust was new, alien. I replayed our conversation in my head, his words echoing, "They don't look like stretch marks." And I could feel a tinge of frustration bubbling inside me. How could he not trust my words? Sitting on the edge of our bed, the dim light of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room, I allowed my mind to drift to previous instances that might have hinted at this sudden burst of jealousy. There was that time at a company party when I had laughed a little too long at a coworker's joke, and I noticed Michael's eyes narrow across the room. Or when he had asked, with a thinly veiled tension, who I was texting late one evening when it was only my sister sharing updates about her new baby. Each memory, each little moment I could recall, seemed now like a thread in a larger tapestry I had not seen the whole of. Was there always an undercurrent of doubt that I had failed to notice? Or was this insecurity something new, something brought on by circumstances I could not understand? Feeling overwhelmed, I reached for my phone. I dialed my best friend, Sarah, needing the comfort of her voice, the reassurance of her perspective. She answered on the second ring, her voice a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. "Hey, what's up? You sound upset," she said, her tone immediately shifting to concern. I poured out the events of the day, my words tumbling out in a rush. As I spoke, I could hear Sarah's steady breathing on the other end of the line, a reminder of the calm I was desperately seeking. "That sounds really tough, but you know, Michael might just be going through something he's not ready to talk about," Sarah offered, always the voice of reason. "But it's also important that he knows he can't project his insecurities onto you." Her words were rational, but they only provided a small comfort against the torrent of emotions I felt. After we hung up, the loneliness crept back, heavier than before. The anxiety started to set in then, gnawing at the edges of my mind. What if Michael's doubts had roots deeper than just the misunderstandings of today? What if these seeds of mistrust grew into something more, something that could not be mended? The thought made my heart race, and I felt a profound sadness at the potential loss of something so dear. I felt misunderstood, isolated in my own relationship. It was as if Michael and I were suddenly speaking different languages, unable to understand each other's words, let alone our feelings. The realization was crushing. The emotional toll was more exhausting than I had anticipated. Sleep eluded me as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows seeming to mock my distress. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's tearful eyes, heard the disbelief in his voice, felt the growing distance between us. The sadness was a heavy cloak I couldn't seem to shed, and I missed him terribly, even though he was just in the next room. As dawn broke, the first light of morning casting a pale glow into the room, I knew something had to change. I couldn't let this misunderstanding fester and poison what we had built together. But as I prepared to face the day, to face Michael, the weight of uncertainty was a constant companion, making each step feel like wading through treacle. The house felt silent and cold when Michael finally came back. It was as if his departure had taken the warmth with him, and now his return brought back not the comfort of his presence, but the shadow of our unresolved issues. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to be absorbed in a book, but really, my mind had been racing with thoughts about our conversation, about his accusations, and about the future of our relationship. When I heard the door open, my heart skipped. I closed the book and stood up, smoothing my sweater, not sure what to expect. Would he apologize? Or would he continue to doubt me? The uncertainty was gnawing at me. "Michael," I called out as he entered the kitchen. He paused, his eyes meeting mine briefly before looking away. He looked tired. His usual bright eyes were clouded with something I couldn't quite decipher. Frustration, confusion, sorrow. "We need to talk," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. He nodded silently, hanging his coat on the rack and reluctantly joining me at the table. We sat across from each other, the tension thick in the air. "Michael, I want to understand why you felt the way you did today," I began, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Do you have any reasons to distrust me, or is there something else that's bothering you? Do you need more reassurance or more attention from me in our relationship?" He looked at his hands for a long moment before responding. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "I don't know, it's just, those marks, they caught me off guard. I trust you, but I couldn't make sense of them. They don't look like what I thought stretch marks looked like." I listened quietly, keeping my emotions in check. "I understand that it was unexpected, but you know I've been trying to gain weight. The doctor said rapid weight gain could cause stretch marks like these." But something had shifted in Michael. Instead of acknowledging the explanation, his face darkened, and his words became harsh, sharp like shards of glass. "No, this doesn't make sense. Who have you been with?" he shouted, his voice escalating as he began to list names. Male colleagues, friends, even distant acquaintances. Each name felt like an accusation, a wound. I stood there, stunned into silence for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. "Michael, stop. Why would you say those things?" Tears began to form, blurring my vision as I heard him continue. Not just questioning my fidelity, but now attacking my profession. He didn't stop there. His anger spilled over to everything connected to me. My friends, my parents. "And what about your so-called supportive friends? What role do they play in this?" he spat out, each word laced with venom. I felt my own anger rising, hot and fierce. "How dare you?" I cried out, my voice cracking. The hurt was overwhelming. I was shaking, sobbing loudly, the tears streaming down my face. But he seemed lost to his rage, unable to see the pain he was inflicting, his suspicions spiraling out of control. The apartment, our home, felt like it was closing in on me, the walls echoing with the destructive force of his accusations. I watched, heartbroken, as he swept his arm across the coffee table, sending books and small trinkets crashing to the floor. His behavior was unlike anything I had ever seen from him. It scared me, seeing him like this, consumed by baseless jealousy. "Michael, please, this isn't you." I pleaded between sobs, trying to reach out to him, to pull him back from the edge of this rage-filled precipice. But he was beyond my reach, his words slicing through the last threads of my composure. Finally, I couldn't bear it any longer. "If you can't trust me, if you can't respect me, then what are we even doing?" I shouted, my voice hoarse from crying. "You need help, Michael, but so do I. We can't go on like this." Silence fell as my words hung in the air. He stopped, his chest heaving, looking around at the chaos he had caused, at the woman he claimed to love now crying uncontrollably because of his actions. It seemed to dawn on him then, the gravity of what had just unfolded between us. The moment was a painful wake-up call, a stark revelation of how deeply our trust had been eroded and how much healing would be necessary if there was any hope for us to move forward. Whether that path would be one we could walk together remained to be seen. The update. As I sat alone in the dim light of our living room, the shadows seemed to stretch across the walls, mirroring the darkening thoughts swirling in my mind. The echoes of Michael's angry words hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the storm that had just passed. He had stormed out again, leaving behind a silence that was thick with unrest and sorrow. This wasn't the first time jealousy had reared its ugly head in our relationship, but tonight, it had turned into sheer madness. Over the past year, I had noticed a troubling pattern in Michael's behavior. It started with small, seemingly insignificant comments about how I dressed for work or the occasional coffee with a friend. But gradually, these comments had morphed into accusations, heated arguments that would end in his tearful apologies and promises to change. Each time I believed him, hoping our love was strong enough to overcome these bouts of insecurity. But as I replayed those moments now, a chilling realization washed over me. It was getting worse, not better. Tonight had been different. The intensity of his anger, the sharpness of his words, everything was magnified. He hadn't just been upset or confused, he had been furious, destructive. The apartment bore the physical marks of his rage, with shattered glass from a picture frame we had picked out together last Christmas lying scattered across the floor like fragments of our once happy memories. As I gathered the broken pieces, my mind raced with questions and fears about our future. Could I continue living like this, walking on eggshells, always anxious about what might set him off next? Was love really supposed to be this hard, this painful? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door. Michael was back, his face pale and his eyes red-rimmed from crying. He looked broken, remorseful. For a moment, my heart ached for him, for us. But then I remembered the fear, the feeling of helplessness as he had yelled and thrown things around, accusing me of betraying him over innocuous stretch marks that were merely the result of my efforts to be healthier. "We need to talk," I said firmly as he stepped closer, his expression one of contrition. "I know, I'm so sorry," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I don't know what got into me. It's just, seeing those marks, it scared me. I thought I was losing you." His words pierced me with a sadness so deep it was almost physical. "Michael, your jealousy isn't new. It's been building up, and every time, it chips away a little more of my trust, my sense of safety with you. I love you, but I can't live like this. We can't keep going through these cycles." He nodded, swallowing hard. I know I need help. I'll do anything. See a therapist. Anything you need. Please. Don't give up on us." But as much as I wanted to believe him, the fear of what might happen if we stayed together haunted me. What if his jealousy turned even more destructive? What if next time, he didn't just break things but broke us beyond repair? "I need to think," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need some space to figure out what's best for us, for me. I'm scared, Michael. I'm scared of what you might do, what you might think of me. That you might believe I betrayed you even if we just break up." He looked devastated, but he nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Okay, I'll stay at my brother's tonight. Take all the time you need," he replied, his tone resigned. After he left, the silence returned, but now it was a silence of solitude, not of anticipation. I pondered over everything, our love, the good times we had shared, and the darkness that had slowly enveloped us. I wondered if ending things would lead him to think I had someone else, if it would prompt him to do something drastic out of a misguided sense of betrayal. The decision lay heavily on me. Continuing as we were was untenable, but the implications of ending things were frightening in their own right. Either choice carried its own set of fears and potential regrets. I realized then that the most immediate need was not just deciding whether to stay or leave, but ensuring both our safeties, emotional and physical. Perhaps a mediated conversation with a therapist present, or a clear safety plan, would be the first steps. Ending a relationship scared me, but continuing in fear scared me more. As the night deepened, so did my resolve. Tomorrow I would call a counselor, someone who could guide us through this, whether it ended in reconciliation or separation. But tonight, I would allow myself to grieve. The loss of the relationship I thought we had. The future I had imagined, and the peace I so desperately craved. I found tampons in my husband's car. I wished he had been unfaithful to me instead, so that my kids wouldn't have had to go through this. I am a 29-year-old female who has been with my 30-year-old husband for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living the honeymoon phase, nearly 5 years, and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that, or him, were it not for a surprise I found in his car last month. When buckling our daughter into her car seat, I noticed something slotted between the cushions. At first, I thought it was just some stray toy or snack wrapper, so I reached down to fish it out. As my fingers closed around the object, I felt the familiar cylindrical shape of a tampon. Confusion washed over me as I pulled it into view, the bright wrapper stark against the upholstery. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD that has stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. It was a brand I'd never used, a small but glaring discrepancy that made my stomach churn. I brought it to my husband's attention later that evening, still holding the offending item like it was evidence in a mystery I was desperate to solve. He didn't seem to understand what it was at first, staring at the tampon in my hand with genuine confusion. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found it in your car, between the cushions, and it's not mine. I haven't had a period in over a year, remember?" His face remained blank for a moment longer before realization dawned. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his co-worker, Fiona. His initial confusion quickly gave way to dismissiveness as he waved off my concerns with a nonchalant explanation. "Probably Fiona's," he said with a shrug, turning back to his phone. "She must have dropped it when we went out for lunch the other day." I stared at him, waiting for a sign that he understood why this was bothering me. But there was nothing. No apology. No concern. Just a casual dismissal. It was as if the tampon was no big deal, and I was overreacting. His indifference felt like a slap in the face, leaving me reeling and questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool to lunch with his co-workers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband. The thought of my husband carpooling with Fiona and her husband had always been a non-issue. They were friends after all, and it wasn't uncommon for them to share rides to lunch. In fact, we often socialized as couples, spending weekends at each other's houses for barbecues or movie nights. Fiona and I had even bonded over shared experiences, like the challenges of balancing work and family life. Our kids played together while we chatted about everything from the latest office gossip to more personal topics. It made sense, considering how often they carpooled. I reassured myself that the tampon could have easily slipped out of Fiona's purse during one of these outings, no big deal. Maybe it fell out when she was grabbing her phone or wallet, getting jostled around in the process. No big deal, right? It was just one of those little accidents that could happen to anyone. I brushed it off as a harmless mistake, convincing myself there was no need to worry. After all, our friendship with Fiona and her husband was solid, built on years of trust and shared experiences. There was no reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary. So, I pushed the unsettling discovery to the back of my mind, determined not to let a small, easily explained incident cause unnecessary drama. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband. I just couldn't get over the way it had been tucked in the seat and how my husband had seemed not to have any regard for it whatsoever. Maybe playing dumb. I don't know. I did something that I now feel kind of crazy for doing. I faked an emergency, and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the tampon I'd found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So the tampon there was probably the same tampon here, and in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning. This time in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair and even more nauseated at the thought that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find. If it was my husband's co-worker, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation I would want to talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick, and embarrassed, to approach him with what I found. Contemplating every possible source of 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks, but I wanted to share an update. Shortly after posting here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon in the back seat and the sock drawer, my husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all the things I suspected but didn't want to believe. We compared tampons, save for the back seat one I had already discarded, and they were a match, just in different absorbents. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or daughters would have found them and moved them around. My daughters didn't know what they were or where they had come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona either pucking my husband, pucking with me, or both. Direct confrontation of either party still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there. Watching my husband for any changed behavior, there was none. Our house for any misplaced foreign items, there were none, and even the girls for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, and partly why he was inclined to believe that the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said, it would be nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls, since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. I felt a good bit of consolation in that. It wasn't until my younger daughter, 2yo, came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her, but my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice, And at that point, we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the third or fourth day, I was just happy to see a near healthy child and a husband who was helping see her through it. Toward the end of that week though, I came home to something strange. The toddler that I'd left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids wear on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kinds of clothes they wear. I'd sworn off the full-length sleepsuits with snaps across the front long before we'd ever had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the ass and a no-go for efficient diaper changes, IMO. It's just not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for, or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them, so I was bewildered. And kind of floored at the thought of someone around our sick child without my knowledge. I didn't think twice, and I went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He seemed confused, like before, and asked me why I would think that. It had just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again, if someone had so much as stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have lashed out and come forward with the accusations right then and there, but our older daughter was in the room and she sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a third time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room and my emotions all over the place, I decided to leave it. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now, after I've driven myself half crazy with explanations that aren't adding up. After nearly losing my mind over a hair clip and a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with the accusations and half-baked guesswork. I'd gotten so absorbed in the paranoia and misery of my situation that I wasn't sleeping, eating or caring for my kids the way I should have been. And I wasn't getting any answers. So, I decided to pull the trigger on the hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house, with my brother-in-law agreeing to help with the install setup over at mine. Before the cameras were ever delivered though, I got my long-awaited confirmation, last week. The day began like any other weekday morning in our bustling household. My husband and I rushed around, trying to corral our two energetic daughters into their school uniforms, all while attempting to grab a quick bite to eat ourselves. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of camaraderie in the air, as if we were all in this hectic dance together. Once the girls were dropped off at school, my husband and I went about our respective workdays, counting down the hours until we could reunite with our little ones. But there was a strange feeling that I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried, and it only intensified when I received a notification on my phone while at work. A ring notification. Motion at the front door. I clicked on the video clip, half expecting to see the usual delivery person or neighbor passing by. But what I saw left me stunned. There on my doorstep was a young woman leading my daughter into the house, hand in hand, with my husband and other daughter close behind them. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The girls were supposed to be in daycare, and my husband was at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. Yet here she was, in our home, with my husband and children. A wave of panic washed over me as I scrambled to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of mistake? A misunderstanding? Or was there something more sinister at play? I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach as I realized that the answers to my questions might be far more troubling than I ever could have imagined. I stared at the screen in disbelief, the blood pounding in my ears as I watched the unthinkable unfold before my eyes. There, on the footage captured by our Ring doorbell, was a scene straight out of a nightmare. A woman I hadn't seen in years, leading my youngest daughter into our home hand in hand, with my husband and older daughter trailing behind them. The shock of the moment rendered me momentarily speechless. How could this be happening? The girls were supposed to be at daycare, and my husband at work. Yet here they were, entering our house with a woman I never thought I'd see again. My sister-in-law. My initial reaction was one of sheer disbelief, a desperate hope that there must be some kind of mistake, some innocent explanation for what I was witnessing. But as the reality of the situation sank in, a wave of anger surged through me like a tidal wave, threatening to consume everything in its path. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone, my heart pounding in my chest as I dialed my husband's number. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But as the phone rang on the other end, there was no response. I immediately called my husband to ask him what the puck this woman was doing in our house. He didn't answer, so I texted it to him. Even in his stupidity, he probably realized he had messed up by going through the front door, knew I had gotten the Ring notification, and wanted to delay the inevitable. By the 5th or 6th subsequent call though, he did pick up. The woman on the camera was my husband's sister. As I would come to find out later, she was the likely source of both tampons, the onesie, and the bow. She is also registered as an individual with a history of abuse, and a recovering addict, who spent the better part of her adolescence and young adulthood coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had abused them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from the way my husband talked about her, I didn't expect I ever would. But here she was, in our house, with our children. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her after years of silence that left me reeling. It was the realization of what her presence in our home meant. My sister-in-law, fresh off another stint in rehab, was the last person I expected to find sneaking into our lives, especially under such clandestine circumstances. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about a random tampon or a harmless mistake. It was about deception and betrayal at the deepest level. Suffice to say, I was livid. It wasn't an affair at all, and still, somehow, infinitely more disgusting knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening. Apparently, my sister-in-law had wanted to reconnect and make amends with people she'd hurt. And my husband was high on that list. The irony of her attempts at reconciliation through deceit and intrusion was not lost on me. My husband didn't want me to know, or, worse, try to keep her family, our children, away from her, so they'd been meeting in secret, often at our house when I was at work. They would enter through the garage, in my husband's car, so the Ring camera at the front door wouldn't tip me off. The level of planning and secrecy involved made my skin crawl. She spent the night on a weekend I had been on a business trip and slept in our bed. The very thought of her in our home, in our bed, made me feel violated. She babysat our girls on a night my husband told me he had dropped them off at his parents'. The casual way he had lied to me, the ease with which he had kept this secret, made me question everything I thought I knew about him. She bought the girls clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie and bow that my husband had promised in his life I had dressed her in myself. The image of my daughter in that unfamiliar outfit, a tiny clip in her hair, now felt like a haunting reminder of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. And yet, when I turned to my husband for reassurance, for a glimmer of hope in the face of uncertainty, all I found was disbelief and denial. He brushed off my concerns with a casual shrug, insisting that it was all in my head, that I was overreacting to a series of harmless coincidences. My husband swore this was all in my head. The tampons, the onesie, the bow, and all the rest. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist. Shrugging off each progressively more unsettling discovery like it was news to him and telling me I was being irrational. He insinuated that I was experiencing postpartum depression, 2 years after I'd given birth. 4 years later I told him that one of my biggest fears for motherhood was to suffer from PPD like my mother had with me, to not be fully present for our babies and be left with a world of guilt and regret as they grew older. But as the weeks stretched into months, and the truth remained stubbornly elusive, my patience wore thin, replaced by a simmering rage that threatened to consume me whole. How could he dismiss my fears so callously, to gaslight me into doubting my own sanity? How could he stand idly by as our family teetered on the brink of collapse? He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to take a step back and reevaluate the state of my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband, and because no other version of events made sense. Now, after a month of this mindfuck, I have nothing to show for my trust but this pathetic situation. And a lot of anger. My husband failed to explain himself. When confronted, he stammered and stumbled over his words, offering half-hearted excuses that made no sense. He muttered something about trying to protect me from unnecessary stress, about his sister just wanting to make amends, but his words were disjointed and unconvincing. Each excuse was more implausible than the last, a desperate attempt to cover up the truth. His evasiveness only confirmed my worst fears. The man I had trusted and built a life with was now a stranger to me, hiding behind a facade of lies and deceit. I watched as he avoided eye contact, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The weight of his betrayal hung heavily in the air, a palpable presence that neither of us could ignore. There was no reasonable explanation for his actions or for the deceit that had tainted our marriage. Every time he opened his mouth, I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that he had been caught and there was no way out. His silence on certain points spoke louder than any words ever could, revealing the depth of his dishonesty. I knew then that I couldn't stay with someone who had so blatantly betrayed my trust and jeopardized the safety of our children. The thought of my daughters being exposed to such toxic secrecy and manipulation was unbearable. I had to prioritize their well-being, and that meant making the hardest decision of my life. With a heavy heart, I told him it was over. The look of shock and desperation on his face was almost pitiable, but it couldn't erase the damage that had been done. I walked away, determined to protect my children from any further harm. I decided to end the relationship and file for divorce. The decision was both heartbreaking and empowering. It was devastating to acknowledge that our 7-year journey together had come to such a bitter end. But it was also liberating to take control of my life and prioritize my well-being, and that of my children. The divorce process was long and grueling. Each step felt like a new battle in an endless war. There were countless court sessions, each more draining than the last, where I had to relive the pain and betrayal over and over again. My husband fought me every step of the way, refusing to accept responsibility for his actions and attempting to paint himself as the victim. His determination to contest every detail made the process even more exhausting and emotionally taxing. In court, I detailed the discovery of the tampons, the hidden meetings with my sister-in-law, and the lies my husband had told to cover his tracks. I showed the ring footage, which captured her entering our home with my children, and provided testimonies from my sister and brother-in-law to corroborate my claims. However, the court needed more than assumptions about my sister-in-law's character. They required concrete evidence of her past and present behavior, which was not easy to obtain. Despite these challenges, I remained focused on the bigger picture. I emphasized my husband's deceit and the breach of trust, which were undeniable. The court recognized the complexity of the situation and the emotional turmoil it had caused. After months of legal battles and countless court sessions, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of our daughters, with my husband receiving supervised visitation rights. The judge acknowledged the need for a stable environment for the children, considering the deceit and the potential risks involved. Looking back, this ordeal taught me several valuable lessons that I hope others can learn from. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. Always listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Communication is key. Address issues head-on rather than letting them fester. Most importantly, never settle for less than you deserve. My children and I deserve a life free from deception and betrayal, and I am committed to building that future for us. In your opinion, what do you think about this story? Please leave your comment below to let me know. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.